In recent years, a new phenomenon has taken over the youth culture of America. We define this as tweaking and the process of being a tweaker. The tweaker is someone who retreats into the inner world, lacks socialization, and commits wrong action in terms of being rude and oftentimes antisocial. Having proliferated after COVID, these days, tweaking can be seen at public schools in which kids will not look anyone in the eye, have very little social contact, and in general are extremely awkward for their age group. According to McKinsey, a prominent consulting group, a series of consumer surveys indicated that Gen Z has the least positive outlook on life, including lower levels of emotional and social well-being than older generations. Though COVID has contributed to this, there's been underlying currents over the past few years that have caused this phenomenon. Tweaking can be characterized as unhuman behavior, sort of bot-like. This has given rise to the NPC trend of people acting like video game characters and pretty much having no soul, personality, or opinions of their own. Some might even say that these individuals lack free will. Tweaking fundamentally is the product of industrial society that has resulted in excess density of population, isolation of man from nature, rapid social change, and the breakdown of small-scale communities such as the extended family, the village, or the tribe. Additionally, social media has changed the game and flipped our entire social environment on its head, resulting in a youth population that is unable to cope and thus retreats away from society. Gen Z is categorized as a generation of extremes. Among its myths, it includes the most motivated, the least motivated, the most optimistic, the least optimistic, the most cynical, and the most ideologically driven. According to the American Psychological Association, Gen Z is the least likely to report good or excellent mental health. According to a new study that surveyed over 1,000 adults by the Bank of America's New Better Money Habits, Gen Z is the most materialistic generation. In Gen Z, you have individuals who have given up on life before it's even started, and you have 24-year-olds with billion-dollar crypto funds. In short, our generation is very polarized. Older generations describe Gen Z as dead inside and unrelatable. Lucky for them, Gen Z hates themselves more than their elders hate them. While some individuals have taken the progress of modernity and run with it, others seem unable to break out of their shells caused by helicopter parenting. Now that we have a basic understanding of what it means to be a tweaker and what it means to tweak, we can go on to discuss reasons for this phenomenon and possible solutions. The first cause of tweaking in this day and age is the erosion of societal pillars that kept people in check in the past. In the past, people would go to Sunday school and get socialized with Judeo-Christian values, and with the decline in religiosity in this nation, this is no longer the case. The media that children consume these days is vastly different than in the past. Less and less kids watch shows such as Sunday School and Mr. Roger that teach social skills and socialize children, and instead are given iPads at early ages to watch YouTube, which tends to be not as educational and with an inhuman algorithm that promotes consumerism. Parents have no idea what their little children are watching, and many times they are exposed to shocking and even traumatizing content at an early age. The YouTube algorithm has no idea what is wholesome and appropriate content, and parents are unaware of what their children are usually watching, as the internet is infinitely vast. Instead of being taught to love one another, taught compassion and how to work together, kids these days are shown videos of pregnant Elsa being chased around by Spider-Man. Less kids are from stable homes. These days it is very common for people to live in single-parent households, and kids born out of wedlock has increased over the last few decades. COVID has made everything much worse. Kids missed out on an average of 2 years of prime socialization, and the results are startling. I recently talked to a good family friend who teaches 3rd grade, but retired after COVID, seeing that his 3rd graders were now crawling on the ground and completely behind on socialization for their age group. No one knows how this damage is going to affect future generations and the kids growing up today. Well, to some, online school was an opportunity to explore personal interests and do whatever they wanted. Other kids were completely lost during lockdown and may never fully recover. Graph is from the Brookings Institute. Macroeconomic factors over the past 30 years have created a society and world that is increasingly uncertain and unequal. As society has gotten more competitive due to the doubling of the workforce in the last 50 years and other macroeconomic factors such as globalization, competition is rife among the youth as people are taught that they need to outcompete their peers in order to have a chance at success. Even with factors such as affirmative action, kids from high-level families tend to take up most of the spots at high-level institutions. We are at the lowest level of upward mobility in our nation's history. The other big social experiment that our generation has been exposed to, and the elephant in the room, is undoubtedly social media. Boys are failed by the school system and society as a whole. Young boys are extremely energetic creatures that demand energetic and physical play in order to be properly socialized. They learn best when given physical tasks and challenges that challenge them both physically and intellectually. Instead, they're given the only choice to sit still and act like little girls, which is nearly impossible. If they're unable to cope with the school system, they are put on ADHD medications, which are primarily amphetamines, and are admonished for just acting like how they're naturally supposed to act. Girls, on the other hand, have been hit very hard by social media. Being the other big social experiment that Gen Z was cruelly subjected to, social media has completely upended the social sphere in ways that the internet combines immense ease, convenience, and dopamine, with these apps literally being designed to be more addictive. Tech has more control of us than vice versa. Girls have the short end of the stick when it comes to this, as they are exposed to mass competition on social media and their body image is negatively affected. Society is quick to give antidepressants that don't really work instead of address root causes of issues. Social safety nets such as youth groups and community groups don't really exist anymore. All these trends combine to make Gen Z feel exceptionally lonely. Gen Z is left feeling exceptionally lonely, lacking lots of the social time that we humans as a eusocial species deeply need. People don't go out, instead deciding to be on Netflix or social media, and no one plans events because no one shows up. Additionally, helicopter parenting has created padded childhoods where kids don't need to learn real-world tasks and thus are unable to act as individuals. All these trends culminate in the NPC. The NPC has limited range of emotions, agrees with the majority, does not have very strong opinions of their own, is not very curious, and often acts strange or off. If you meet an NPC in real life, you'll question whether they have free will or are even conscious. In short, the perfect consumer. However, while they may be good for capitalism, they are bad for society as a whole. When people are less curious, questioning, and cognizant, it leaves room for tyranny to take hold. It gets rid of our ability as a society to react quickly and decisively to changes, and it makes you stagnant. If most people can't think for themselves and are hopelessly addicted to the opiate that is their phone, then how can we as a society move forward? How can there be any room for dynamism? Well, it's often easy and tempting to throw your hands in the air and call upon the end of the world. It is never smart to bet on the end of the world, as it only happens once. For every action, there is a reaction, and for every historical and social event, there is a response. Thus, it is safe to assume that a response will emerge out of the issues we have just laid out. What this action will look like and what form it will take can only be postulated upon, but one thing that is for certain is that rhetoric will be the primary way it is communicated and transmitted across society. Over time, we will see new movements that seek to explain and respond to reality and try to build a better world. The Romantic movement came out of a need to get away from the new industrial world that people struggled to cope with. The 60s counterculture was a response to war, commercialism, and an overestablishment of social norms. Civil rights was a product of decades of discontentment and anger in the African American community that eventually manifested into action. Once discontentment grows and anger reaches a point of critical mass, there is no stopping change. Progressive as well as conservative ideas are only as strong as the rhetoric in which they are communicated with. The rhetoric of future social change will inherently be a product of our times, and thus new forms of communication will take the forefront in the push towards progress.
This is crap. How do I reach these kids?
Rhetoric needs to be applied to three different levels of society in order for social progress to happen. Rhetoric needs to be able to connect to personal, institutional, and national levels in order for change to ultimately happen. The hardest yet most essential level in which to reach people is on the personal level. For this to be successful, it is paramount that we act first in order to get control of the narrative before any such narrative can be co-opted for less than honest purposes. We need to start by painting a picture of a future that we desire, a future better than the status quo. We desire for people not to act like bots or NPCs, but rather the curious, insightful, and freed-willed individuals that they really are. We desire a world that does not suppress creative talent, but instead empowers it. We desire a world in which people can come together not in toxic online spaces, but face to face. We desire to reverse the trends of loneliness of the 21st century. We desire the backlash against modernity to not be counterproductive and instead be a correction. We desire a national movement to bring us together and allow for the promises of technology to bear fruit, not tear us apart. If we fail, these current trends that affect an AL society will continue to get worse and worse. If it all goes wrong, much of the beauty of this world may be destroyed and lost. Suffering begets suffering, and we need to act now to prevent current societal trends from snowballing. We do not desire to tear down society, but rather build a better world off its foundations. It is important that our rhetoric be effective. In an October 2022 article in Time magazine by Angela Helpt, the former editor of US Food and Health, though it may feel satisfying in the moment to call someone your favorite derogatory term, it is never going to help them understand your point of view. Rather, experts in persuasive communication say it's crucial to focus on curiosity and compassion, and to make it clear that you don't think the other person you're talking to is the enemy or look down on them. Our movement needs to focus on compassion and kindness in order to reach the audience and not make them feel threatened. It's important they feel safe in hearing what we have to say. It's important that we approach individuals as individuals ourselves, and luckily modern technology makes this more possible than it ever has been in the history of humanity.
In Dante's Inferno, the only way out of hell is going to the bottom rather than searching for the top. In the same way, this applies to technological progress, as it is impossible to stand against something as unstoppable as the eternal march of progress, and rather than trying to resist in vain, we need to embrace new technology, and one aspect that is very interesting is virtual reality. While being virtual, having a reality is better than the innate unreality of social media, which is trying to take a 3D experience of socialization and scaling it down to a 2D consumable product. In this process, a lot of what makes interactions meaningful and rewarding is taken away as it is lost in this dimensional and class capitalist transfer of medium and meaning. Ultimately, VR offers a way to connect with people in a more legitimate way, embrace any identity that you would like to, and find a sense of community with people who might live thousands of miles away. In the day of the internet, people have very niche hobbies, as you can find anything that interests you. However, the unfortunate part of this is that other people interested in your very niche hobby are going to live far away. But VR offers a way for these people to communicate and interact in something that is more meaningful than a Reddit page. Ultimately, we as rhetoricians need to embrace this new medium and see that technology isn't all bad, and there are hope and light at the end of the tunnel, and thus we need to employ our rhetoric in these key areas that can have the most impact and aren't as already over narratorized and subverted like traditional media.
Content such as podcasts allow for communication that doesn't necessarily need to be in sound bites and talking points, but rather fully fleshed out with context. Additionally, the modern invention of TikTok lets one single individual become famous no matter where or who they are. TikTok as a platform and their very innovative algorithm allows one person to leapfrog the entire line of creators and spread a message. If an individual can harness rhetoric to be persuasive and entertaining enough, then they can reach billions, regardless of affiliation. A new wave of influencers, not seeking material gain, but rather seeking societal progress and growth, can advocate for new practices in people's lives. In a November 9th, 2022 article by NPR, meditation was found to work as well as popular drugs to reduce anxiety, such as Lexapro. While much of Gen Z does not read news articles related to pharmacology and mental health, they do listen to TikTok. If well-meaning influencers can spread messages such as meditation and promote retreats into the natural world and reading clubs in terms of group activities, then more people can catch on to this trend. Some individuals find meaning and peace through the use of psychedelics. You can now see that this trend is being promoted on TikTok and is gaining following and prominence. Additionally, podcasts of huge reach such as Joe Rogan can advocate for alternative health methods such as the Wim Hof breathing method, which is proven to spike adrenaline to the point where after the method is completed, participants feel a sense of calm and focus. As a personal anecdote, I had a good friend who was terribly addicted to Adderall and stimulants. After talking to him on an individual level and expressing my worry, eventually he found that meditation helped him regulate himself better than his medication did, and thus he eventually got out of the cycle of addiction and dependency. This one individual was able to communicate to his friends who suffered from similar issues his success and his trials, and thus more people ended up being saved. The power of the individual is that you can communicate on an individual level and tailor your rhetoric towards people you know the best. While it may seem hopeless to save just one person, if one person is saved, they can save another, and the cycle continue until our message can permeate the rest of society. We live in the era of information snowballing. If the ball gets rolling, it can quickly gain traction and size, and a real movement can be born out of a single person practically overnight. Getting on the Joe Rogan podcast would instantly communicate your idea to an average of 12 million listeners. Technology provides the means for rhetoric to be absolutely transformative, whether that is for good or evil. If new wellness trends take off on TikTok and other people start replicating this, then you have mass social penetration. If more and more individuals see that their lives have improved and become more fulfilling and beautiful, then there is the possibility for institutional and eventually national change. We have a possibility for a whole new romantic movement that helps us better cope with the world we find ourselves living in. Here, art has the possibility to speak to our souls. New art movements that emphasize our values have the possibility to touch people in a way that verbal rhetoric is unable to. With the power of technology such as TikTok, Instagram, and wider social media, these underground artists have the ability to reach millions without backing by institutions. Technology gives us the ability to circumnavigate traditional institutions of rhetoric and information and directly reach the people who need to be reached. Ironically, we can use cell phone addiction to cure others' cell phone addiction. If you tell enough people to go outside, some may actually go outside. Some may put down the phone. What matters is reach, and technology gives us that power. Again, the rhetoric surrounding our movement needs to be friendly. From the aforementioned Time article, our strategy can be thought of as ABC, agree before challenging. It is good to agree with parts of someone's statement that you have common ground on, even though you may not agree with it entirely. You can agree that phones certainly exist and need to be used in society, while also arguing that it is important to have time in the real world and not retreat into your inner world. It is important not to repeat the mistakes of the past and create a counterculture. Rather, our rhetoric needs to be integrated within the culture it comes out of and be a part of it if it ultimately hopes to subvert the culture. Strong individual ethos must be cultivated. Our audience's pathos must not be trampled over either. If we do both of these things correctly, then our logos will definitely find its mark. Once critical mass is reached, institutional change is possible. Living in a democracy, if enough individuals are turned to our belief system, school boards can start to change. Education that better reaches and serves their students can become more commonplace. The way we approach education needs to change. An October article from the Association of Psychological found that stress actually induced an increase of empathy in boys, and this did not happen in girls. The method went that oftentimes psychologists will ask people to count backwards in 7. This is intended to create a certain amount of stress, and thus they measure the amount of empathy created. We can use rhetoric that can harness such biological traits to better teach people empathy. Schools need to teach and arm students about rhetoric and with rhetoric. These days, information is ubiquitous and thus irrelevant. We need to train our kids how to think, and there's a few ways of going about this. I am an advocate for mandatory debate lessons, letting kids debate both sides of an issue, and even if they don't agree with either side or agree with one in particular, they will be able to see the complexities of arguments and better understand the reality of the world we live in. Additionally, education can be influenced by Burke's pentad, a way of breaking down situations and examining the relationships between them, or Derrida's deconstruction, in which it functions as a way to be more thoughtful and analytical when looking at the world around us. It is not institutions' jobs to teach students what to think, but rather how to think, and we must trust that they come to the best conclusions as they are human just like us. Teaching rhetoric and thinking is ultimately the cure to NPCs, and if people can think for themselves, they are inherently liberated from the world and free to decide. Overall, we can work towards a more empathetic society. On the national level, certain policies can help alleviate some of the stresses from modern life. While I'm by no means a friend or supporter of the CCP, certain policies they have implemented online may be successful. They have made it where the TikTok algorithm is modified in their country and thus promotes more educational and well-being focused videos other than what is promoted on the American version of the app. Additionally, the national government can limit amounts of screen time by regulating how apps respond to children. And also, the types of ads shown to children and the types of content promoted can be eventually regulated or encouraged to be more productive. Overall, we need an online space whose sole input isn't necessarily screen time and clicks, but promotes more social cohesion and is not as counterproductive as the system currently is. I, in no means, am a computer scientist and do not know how this will be implemented, but rhetoric can point us in the right direction. Overall, time is going to be the main conduit in terms of how our rhetoric is shaped, formed, and ultimately delivered. Over time, new societal rules and beliefs over use of social media and how to interact on the online space will form and develop. It is up to rhetoric that well-meaning individuals can get their message out and thus help shape these trends and ideas based off how we respond to the modern world. An annoying trend that has a lot of potential emerged over COVID. Short infographics created on Instagram and widely shared told people how to think about certain social events and how to respond. While oftentimes these may be misleading and end up in bad conclusions, if this is mobilized correctly, mass messages about how to respond and promote equity, equality, and inclusion on social media can be achieved. Only time will tell how these trends play out, but if we are rhetorically effective in influencing society as a whole, then hopefully a better, more meaningful, more cognizant world may emerge.